The obsidian surface of the High Council table seemed to drink the light from the nebula swirling beyond the viewport, a vast, indifferent expanse of violet and bruised gold that framed the silence of the chamber. In this hall, the air was always cold, maintained at a temperature that favored the crystalline biology of the high judges. Yet today the chill felt deeper, seeping into the marrow of even the warm-blooded species gathered in the amphitheater. This was the sanctum of the Galactic Concordat, the oldest political entity in the known universe, a structure built upon the bones of dead stars and the ruins of civilizations that had failed to heed its laws. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized by the weight of the decision that hung over the assembly like a guillotine blade waiting for gravity's final argument. High Counselor Vrax, a towering figure of chitin and scarred battle plate representing the Valdrak Empire, shifted his immense bulk, the sound of his armored carapace scraping against the stone floor echoing like a landslide in a canyon. He did not look at the other delegates. His multifaceted eyes were fixed on the holographic projection hovering in the center of the room, a small, unremarkable blue sphere orbiting a yellow dwarf star in a desolate, unfashionable arm of the spiral. Earth. A name that meant dirt in their primitive tongue. A world that had been silent for too long, a world that the Valdrak believed was ripe for the taking, a fruit that had fallen from the tree of relevance and was rotting in the dark. Beside him, though physically dwarfed by the Valdrak's militaristic presence, sat Ambassador Lyra of the Silen Collective. She was a creature of grace and bioluminescence, her skin pulsing with soft, rhythmic patterns of azure and silver that betrayed her internal emotional state to anyone skilled enough to read the language of light. Currently, her patterns were erratic, jagged strobes of anxiety. She sensed the bloodlust radiating from Vrax, a psychic pressure that tasted like copper and ozone. The Silen were scholars, diplomats, the listeners of the void, and Lyra had spent the last standard cycle analyzing the data streaming from the Sol system. What she found there did not suggest weakness, nor did it suggest the primitive chaos the Valdrak claimed. It suggested something else, something anomalous and geometrically precise that defied the standard progression of technological civilizations. But the Concordat was not interested in anomalies today. It was interested in expansion, in resources, and in the enforcement of the Great Peace. The debate had raged for 3 solar cycles, and patience was fraying. The Valdrak wanted a war of annexation. The trade guilds wanted a blockade. The Silen wanted caution, but the silence from Earth was the damning evidence. In a galaxy where every civilization screamed its existence into the void via subspace beacons and quantum entanglement bursts, silence was viewed as a symptom of death, or worse, distinct cowardice. The time for deliberation has decayed, Vrax rumbled, his voice a subsonic thrum that vibrated in the chest cavities of everyone present. He gestured with a clawed hand toward the hologram. Look at it, a chaotic cradle world. They cracked the atom 3 centuries ago, and yet they have no faster-than-light signature. They have no subspace communication grid. They are trapped in their own gravity well, squabbling over hydrocarbon sludge and rare isotopes while the galaxy turns without them. They are not a civilization, they are a failed experiment. The Valdrak fleets are positioned at the heliopause. We require only the mandate of integration to bring order to their chaos. We will strip the resources, pacify the population, and incorporate the system into the supply lines for the Outer Rim expansion. It is efficient. It is necessary. It is mercy. The last word was spoken with a sneer that suggested Vrax knew nothing of mercy, only of the binary logic of predator and prey. Lyra stood, her robes shimmering as if woven from liquid starlight. She kept her voice calm, projecting it through the acoustic amplifiers of the chamber, though her internal hearts were racing. High Counselor, you mistake silence for emptiness. The Silen listening posts have detected irregularities, not the noise of radio chatter, no, but gravitational lensing, minute fluctuations in the fabric of local spacetime surrounding that system. It is too rhythmic to be natural. It is too quiet. A predator does not scream before it strikes, Vrax. You of all people should know that. If they have achieved a level of technology that masks their presence, then invading them is not an act of integration. It is an act of suicide. Her words hung in the air, sharp and clear, but they were met with a ripple of dismissal from the assembled delegates. The trade guild representatives muttered among themselves, checking their profit margins. To them, Earth. Ledger entry, a localized accumulation of water and minerals that was currently underutilized. The idea that a species without FTL drives could pose a threat to the Concordat, an empire that spanned thousands of star systems and possessed weaponry capable of cracking planetary crusts, was laughable. It was the paranoia of the Silen, always seeing ghosts in the machine. The Grand Arbiter, a being of pure energy encased in a containment suit of gold and glass, floated above the dais. Its voice was a chorus of synthesized tones, devoid of passion but absolute in authority. The arguments have been logged. The fear of the Silan is noted but lacks material evidence. The ambition of the Valdrek is noted and aligns with the Concordat's need for resource stability in Sector 7. The species known as humanity has failed to petition for membership. They have failed to respond to the standard navigational hails sent by our automated buoys. By the laws of the Concordat, a civilization that does not speak is considered dormant or non-sentient in the eyes of the galactic community. The mandate is granted. The Valdrek are authorized to secure the Sol system. Pacification protocols are in effect, minimize damage to the biosphere but ensure total submission. The gavel struck, a sound like a thunderclap that sealed the fate of billions. Lyra sank back into her seat, her light dimming to a mournful gray. She looked at the hologram of the blue marble one last time. It looked so fragile, suspended in the velvet dark. She felt a profound sense of grief, not just for the humans who were about to be crushed, but for the Concordat. She could not shake the feeling that they had just walked through a door that would lock behind them. The transition from the council chamber to the bridge of the Void Piercer, the flagship of the Valdrek Armada, was a shift from cold bureaucracy to burning anticipation. The ship was a Leviathan, a kilometer-long spear of dark metal bristling with kinetic railguns, plasma lances, and antimatter torpedo tubes. It sat at the head of a formation that stretched across the sensor displays, a cloud of destruction waiting to be unleashed. Admiral Croter, a veteran of a dozen planetary subjugations, stood on the command deck, watching the distance counter tick down as the fleet engaged its sublight drives to cross the final distance from the heliopause to the inner system. They had exited hyperspace at the edge of the system to avoid gravity well interference, and now they were prowling inward, like wolves encircling a campfire. The silence of the system was indeed unnerving. Usually when a fleet of this magnitude entered a system, the local airwaves would explode with panic, demands for identification, pleas for mercy, threats of retaliation. But Sol remained mute. The radio spectrum was a wash of static. The planets spun in their orbits, indifferent. "Sensor report," Croter barked, his mandibles clicking with impatience. "Where are their defenses? Where are their orbital platforms? Do they truly have nothing?" The sensor officer, a younger Valdrek with eager eyes, scanned the readouts. "Nothing, Admiral. We detect thousands of artificial satellites in orbit around the third planet, but they appear primitive. Communications relays, whether monitoring, simple optical telescopes. No weapon signatures, no shield harmonics." "It appears the intelligence directorate was correct. They are defenseless. We could glass the continents from here and they wouldn't know we were coming until the sky caught fire." Croter grunted, a sound of disappointment. He had hoped for a fight, for a chance to test the new plasma arrays. This would be a slaughter, a boring administrative task of landing troops and suppressing riots. "Very well. Move the fleet to high orbit over the major population centers. Charge the primary batteries, but hold fire. We will broadcast the surrender decree on all frequencies. Let them see the sky darken with our ships. Fear is a cheaper ammunition than plasma." The Armada moved inward, passing the gas giants, the silent sentinels of the outer system. They passed the asteroid belt, pushing aside rocks with navigational deflectors. As they approached Earth, the blue-white jewel grew in the viewports, beautiful and terrifyingly vulnerable. The Valdrek ships broke formation, spreading out to encompass the globe, their shadows falling across oceans and cities. Croter watched the tactical map, waiting for the red dots of resistance to appear. None did. The planet simply spun. It was then that the communications officer spoke, his voice trembling slightly. "Admiral, I am detecting a signal. It is not radio, it is not subspace, it is coming from everywhere." Croter turned, his eyes narrowing. "Explain, is it a transmission?" "No, sir, it is a carrier wave, but it is originating from the vacuum itself. The energy readings are spiking. Sir, the energy readings are off the scale. They are coming from the space between our ships." Before Croter could issue a command, the universe shifted. It was not a violent explosion, nor a flash of light. It was a sudden, sickening lurch in reality, as if the universe had taken a sharp breath. The viewports, which had been showing the starfield and the planet below, suddenly rippled. The darkness of space changed texture, shifting from the void of vacuum to a shimmering, translucent barrier that encased the entire fleet. The engines of the Void Piercer whined and died. The hum of the gravity generators ceased, leaving the crew weightless for a split second before emergency systems kicked in. Panic erupted on the bridge. "Report, what hit us?" Croter roared, pulling himself back to his command console. We have lost propulsion, all main reactors are offline, weapon systems are locked out, sir, we are being held. The sensor officer pointed at the main screen. The blue planet was gone, the stars were gone. They were inside a bubble, a construct of hard light and folded dimensions that had materialized out of nothingness. They were trapped in a cage the size of a planetary orbit. And then the object appeared. It did not warp in, it simply faded into existence as if it had been there all along, merely waiting for them to notice it. It was a station, but unlike any station the Concordat had ever built. It was a perfect ring of silver and matte black, rotating slowly around a central spire that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic golden light. It was massive, dwarfing the Valdrak flagship, a testament to engineering that defied the known laws of physics. It had no visible thrusters, no visible weapons ports, only a smooth, seamless hull that looked more like a sculpture than a fortress. From the central spire a beam of light shot out, connecting with the void piercer. It was not a weapon, it was a data bridge. The screens on the Valdrak bridge flickered, the harsh red of the tactical displays replaced by a calm, soothing blue. The chaotic noise of the alarms was silenced, replaced by a low, resonant hum. A figure appeared on the main holographic projector. It was a human. He was seated in a simple chair, dressed not in a military uniform, but in a plain gray tunic. He was older, his hair white, his face lined with the passage of time, but his eyes were sharp, holding a depth of intelligence that made Croder feel suddenly, inexplicably small. The human did not look angry. He did not look afraid. He looked disappointed, like a teacher who had caught a student cheating on a test. When he spoke, his voice was translated instantly into the Valdrak tongue, not by the ship's computer, but by the transmission itself, speaking directly to their neural centers. "Greetings," the human said. "I am Director Vance of the Sol Warden Corps. You have entered a quarantine zone. You have violated the boundary of the sanctuary. We monitored your approach from the Uit cloud. We listened to your debate in the council. We heard you vote for our subjugation. It was regrettable." Croder bristled, his warrior pride stinging at the calm condescension of the creature. "I am Admiral Croder of the Valdrak Empire, acting under the authority of the Galactic Concordat. Release my fleet immediately or face the full might of the Armada. You are a primitive species. You have no FTL. You have no standing in the galaxy. This is a lawful annexation." Vance sighed, a very human gesture that conveyed a universe of weariness. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "Admiral, please look at your displays, look at your fleet." Croder looked. The tactical map showed his ships, hundreds of them, drifting helplessly. "We do not use FTL because we do not need to go anywhere," Vance said softly. "We do not use subspace radios because they are noisy and inefficient. You call us primitive because we do not shout into the void. You mistake silence for ignorance, but we have been listening to you for 2,000 years. We know your laws, we know your history. We know about the Silan, the Valdrak, the infinite petty wars over resources. We chose not to participate." "You are trapped," Croder snarled, though his confidence was eroding with every passing second. "You have one station, I have a fleet of world killers." Vance smiled, a sad, thin smile. "Admiral, you are not trapped in a force field. You are trapped in a pocket of localized time dilation. While we speak, a nanosecond is passing in the galaxy outside. We could hold this conversation for a century, and your empire would not even know you had arrived. As for your weapons..." Vance tapped a finger on his armrest. On the Valdrak ship, the lights flickered. "Your fusion cores are currently dampened. Your antimatter containment is being reinforced by our fields so you don't blow yourselves up. We have dismantled your firing mechanisms on a molecular level. We did this not to harm you, but to stop you from hurting yourselves. We are not soldiers, Admiral. We are NG. Nears, and you have walked into a construction site." Revelation hit Croder like a physical blow. They hadn't just been overpowered, they had been completely outclassed. The humans weren't fighting a war, they were managing a nuisance. What are you?" Croder whispered. "If you are this powerful, why hide? Why stay on one rock? You could rule the sector." Vance's expression hardened, the sorrow replaced by a steel resolve. "Rule? Why would we want to rule? We have a job to do. You see, Admiral, you look at the galaxy and see stars and planets to conquer. We look at the galaxy and see the cracks in the foundation." The human stood up and the view behind him shifted. The image of the station faded, replaced by a view of the Sol system, but seen through a different lens. The fabric of space was visible as a grid, and tearing through the outer edges of the solar system were massive, jagged fissures glowing with a sickly violet light. "You thought the silence of this sector was natural," Vance continued, his voice dropping an octave. "It isn't. We silenced it. We built a damper around our star, around this entire region of space." Back in the High Council chamber, the hologram of the battle, or lack thereof, was being broadcast live. The feed had been hijacked by the humans, displayed for the High Judges and Ambassador Lyra to see. The silence in the grand chamber was absolute. Vrax was frozen, his mandibles slack. Lyra watched with a mixture of vindication and terror. The human Vance seemed to address them now, looking through the sensor pickup of the flagship directly into the council. "High Counselors," Vance said. "You sent a fleet to conquer a people you thought were savages. You found us. Now you must understand why we were hiding. We are not hiding from you. We are the doorstop." "The doorstop?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. Vance nodded as if he heard her. "The region of space you call Sector 7G is not just empty, it is thin. The barrier between this universe and the darker place is weak here. Ancient wars, ones fought long before your Concordat existed, cracked the bedrock of reality in this system. If we were to use FTL drives here, if we were to engage in high-energy subspace transmissions, the vibrations would shatter the barrier. The void would open and things would come through, things that eat stars." The image on the screen zoomed out, showing the human station, the Aegis, and then revealing a network of thousands of similar stations, cloaked and invisible, forming a massive geodesic sphere around the entire Sol system. It wasn't a defense grid against invasion, it was a containment field. "We have spent the last 1,000 years building this cage," Vance explained. "We dedicated our entire civilization, our economy, our science, to one purpose, holding the wall. We don't explore because we cannot leave our post. We don't speak because silence is the mortar that holds the bricks together." Vrax sank into his chair, the arrogance drained from his body. We nearly broke it," he murmured. "Our fleet, the warp wakes, the weapon discharges." Vance nodded solemnly. "Your arrival caused stress fractures in the north quadrant of the system. We are repairing it now, but you must understand, we are not your enemy. We are your shield. You play at empire building in the safety of the inner galaxy because we are out here in the dark holding back the storm." The gravity of the statement settled over the council. The humans, the primitives they had mocked, were the guardians of the galaxy. They had sacrificed their destiny among the stars to ensure there were stars left for others to inherit. "What happens now?" Lyra asked, her voice projecting clearly this time. "We have violated your sanctuary. We have endangered the work." Vance looked at her, and for the first time there was warmth in his eyes. "Now we talk, the veil is lifted, we can no longer hide. The stress on the barrier is increasing. We have held it alone for a millennium, but we are tired. Our resources are stretched. The arrival of your fleet, while dangerous, proves one thing: we can no longer do this alone." The screen shifted again, showing a simulation of the galaxy. A red stain was spreading from the Sol sector, a simulation of what would happen if the barrier failed. It consumed everything. "The Concordat has resources," Vance said. "You have ships, you have energy. We have the technology to reinforce the wall, but we need materials. We need labor. We need a united front. We are offering you an alliance, not of subjugation, but of survival." The high judges looked at one another. The petty politics, the trade disputes, the border skirmishes, all of it seemed instantly trivial against the backdrop of the cosmic horror Vance had revealed. The Valdrak counselor, Vrax, stood up slowly. He looked at the human, then at his own claws, instruments of war that now seemed like toys. "The Valdrak, respect strength." Vrax rumbled, his voice humbled. "We thought strength was conquest. We were wrong. To hold the sky on your shoulders, that is strength." He bowed his head, a gesture of submission never before seen from a high counselor. "The Valdrak fleet is yours to command, Director Vance. We will haul the stone. We will pour the mortar." Lyra felt tears of light streaming down her face. "The Silan Collective will provide the calculations, the logistics. We will weave the energy streams." One by one, the delegates stood. The trade guilds pledged their fleets. The scientific castes pledged their minds. It was the unification the Concordat had always preached but never achieved, catalyzed not by war, but by the revelation of a silent, selfless guardian. Vance nodded, and the tension on the bridge of the Aegis seemed to dissipate. "Thank you," he said simply, "but we must work quickly. The breach your fleet caused is stabilized, but the entity on the other side, it noticed." The atmosphere in the council chamber shifted from relief to a new, colder kind of fear. "Noticed?" Lyra asked. Vance turned back to the view of the rift. The violet fissures were pulsing now, rhythmic and hungry. "Something is pushing back against the cage. It knows the door is unlocked. We have bought time, but the war is no longer cold. It is about to become very hot." The screen faded to black, leaving the council in the dim violet light of the nebula. But the silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of indifference or stagnation. It was the silence of focus. The Valdrak fleet, released from the time dilation field, began to move not in formation for attack, but in formation for defense, falling into line alongside the massive human rings. Engineering skiffs from Earth launched to meet them. tiny specks of light bridging the gap between two civilizations that had been strangers only an hour before. On the surface of Earth, the people looked up. The cloaking fields were disengaging. For the first time in history, the night sky was not just a tapestry of distant stars. It was filled with the lights of thousands of ships, alien and human, moving in a grand, intricate dance. They were not invaders, they were partners. The quarantine was over. The long watch had ended and the Great War was beginning. But as Lyra watched the telemetry from the Sol system, seeing the energy grids link up, alien fusion pouring into human capacitors, she felt a surge of hope. The galaxy was vast and the dark was deep, but they were no longer facing it alone. The humans had held the torch for so long. Now the rest of the galaxy would help them build a bonfire. The weeks that followed the revelation of Sol were a blur of frenetic activity that reshaped the political and economic landscape of the galaxy. The Galactic Concordat, once a slow-moving beast of bureaucracy, transformed into a war council. The shock of the human revelation had stripped away the lethargy of peace. There were no more debates about tariffs or border disputes. Every shipyard in the Valdrak Empire was converted to produce high-density hull plating compatible with human barrier technology. The Scylan universities emptied as physicists and engineers flocked to the Sol system, eager to learn from the quiet ones, the new moniker for humanity that had replaced the primitives. Ambassador Lyra found herself on a shuttle descending toward the Aegis, the central station of the human containment grid. Seeing it up close was a religious experience for a species attuned to energy like the Scylan. The station was a marvel of dimensional engineering, a looped construct that didn't just exist in space but anchored space around it. As her shuttle docked, she was greeted not by soldiers, but by scientists in plain jumpsuits. The interior of the station was utilitarian, stark, and humming with power. She was led to a central observation deck where Director Vance was waiting. He looked more tired than he had on the hologram, his eyes rimmed with red, but his posture was upright, unyielding. "Ambassador," Vance said, extending a hand, "welcome to the edge of the world." Lyra took his hand, marveling at the biological warmth, the fragility of the skin compared to the immense intellect and will behind it. "Director, the Council has authorized the deployment of the Third Sector Energy Reserve. It will be channeled to your grid within the cycle. It is an unprecedented amount of power." Vance nodded, walking her to the main viewport. "We'll need it. The breach is widening. Look." He pointed out into the void. To the naked eye, space looked normal, but through the station's filtered glass, the horror was visible. A tear in reality, jagged and bleeding violet energy, was throbbing against the golden lattice of the human containment field. It looked like a wound that refused to heal. "What is it?" Lyra whispered. "You called it a predator." "We call them the entropic," Vance replied. "They are not biologue. Eichel, they are consciousness without form, existing in the chaotic fluid between universes. They feed on order, physics, laws, gravity, life. It all offends them. They want to return everything to the soup." He paused, looking at the tear. "We found the crack when we first invented FTL drives 300 years ago. Our first test flight didn't go to Alpha Centauri. It punched a hole straight into their domain. We realized immediately what we had done. We dismantled the ships. We scrubbed the technology. We turned our entire civilization into a patch for that hole." Lyra stared at him, horrified. "You sacrificed the stars to save us from your mistake." "No," Vance corrected gently. "The crack was already there, ancient. We just knocked on the door. If we hadn't, someone else would have. Maybe the Valdrak, maybe you, and you wouldn't have known how to close it." He turned to her. "We are not saviors, Lyra. We are janitors, but the mop is breaking." A tremor ran through the station, a deep, groaning vibration that rattled Lyra's teeth. Alarms blared, soft, polite chimes, but insistent. "Sector 4 stress fracture," a calm AI voice announced. "Reinforcing with auxiliary power." "It's testing us," Vance said, watching the readouts. "It senses the new energy sources, the Concordat ships. They are like fresh meat to a shark. The entropic are drawn to high-energy states. We need to integrate your fleets into the grid fast. If they fire their weapons independently, the feedback will shatter the lattice." Lyra tapped her comms link. "I will relay the protocols. The Valdrak Admiral is eager to shoot something. I will tell him that shooting is exactly what the enemy wants." Vance chuckled dryly. "Tell him that if he fires a plasma lance, he's feeding the beast. We fight this with math, with shields, and with will. We hold the line." The integration process was a logistical nightmare, but a diplomatic miracle. For the first time, Valdrak warriors took orders from human engineers. They grumbled, their pride chafing, but when they saw the readings, when they saw the sheer scale of the nothingness pushing back against them, they obeyed. Silan telepaths linked with human AI to optimize the energy flow, creating a hybrid network of intuition and calculation that was more efficient than either species could achieve alone. The Sol system became a fortress of light, a golden sphere against the encroaching dark. Then came the night of the breach. It started with a whisper, a psychic scream felt by every telepath in the fleet. The tear in reality didn't just widen, it shattered. A claw, not of flesh, but of void-stuff, negative space that hurt the eye to look at, reached through the gap. It was the size of a moon. It struck the containment grid, and the Aegis screamed. Metal twisted. The golden light flickered and turned red. On the bridge, Vance was thrown from his chair as sparks showered the command deck. "Status!" he yelled. "Shield integrity at 40%, the tactical officer shouted. "It's physically pushing through, we can't hold it." "Signal the Valdrak," Vance ordered. "Protocol Omega, they have to initiate the mass driver link." In the void, the Valdrak fleet, thousands of ships strong, maneuvered into a tight formation behind the human stations. They didn't fire at the enemy. Instead, they fired their engines and their energy transfer beams directly into the human stations. It was a desperate maneuver, pouring the raw output of an entire stellar empire into the crumbling human capacitors. Croter on the bridge of the Void Piercer roared the command. "Push! Give them everything! Drain the life support if you have to! Do not let that wall fall!" The surge of energy hit the Aegis like a tsunami. The station groaned, the hull heating up to critical levels, but the grid held. The golden light flared, turning blinding white. The claw of the entropic entity burned, dissolving as it touched the reinforced barrier. A screech echoed through the minds of everyone in the system, a sound of frustration and pain. The entity recoiled, pulling back into the rift. "Now!" Vance shouted. "Seal it! Use the excess power to fuse the dimensional tier." The human scientists triggered the dimensional welders, massive projectors that manipulated the Higgs field. The white light focused on the tier, stitching the fabric of the universe back together. It was slow, agonizing work. The Valdrak ships began to go dark, their reactors dry. The Silan telepaths passed out from the strain, but the tier shrank, smaller, smaller, until with a final thunderclap that shook the solar system, it vanished. Silence returned to the Sol system, but it was not the silence of hiding. It was the silence of exhaustion. The Aegis floated in the dark, scorched and battered, but intact. The Valdrak fleet drifted, powerless, waiting for rescue tugs. The rift was gone. The scar remained, but the door was closed. Vance pulled himself up from the deck. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was smiling. He looked at the screen. The Valdrak, the Silan, the humans, they were all alive. He opened a channel to the fleet. "This is Director Vance. The breach is sealed. The entity has been repelled." A cheer went up, not just from the human crew, but from the alien ships. A cacophony of roars, trills, and shouts in a dozen languages. It was the sound of a galaxy that had learned, in the face of death, that they were on the same side. Days later, in the grand chamber of the Concordat, the atmosphere was transformed. The lighting was warmer. The air felt lighter. The human delegation sat at the center of the room, no longer a hologram, but in the flesh. Vance stood at the podium, flanked by Lyra and Croter. The three of them represented a new triumvirate, the shield, the sword, and the mind. "We deceived you," Vance began, his voice echoing in the hall. "We let you believe we were weak because we could not risk your interference. We apologize for the deception." High Counselor Vrax, who had retained his seat but lost his arrogance, stood up. "There is no need for apology, Director. You carried the burden we were too blind to see. You saved the Concordat. You saved the Valdrak. We owe you a debt that cannot be paid in credits or resources." "We do not want a debt," Vance said. "We want a future. The entropic are gone for now, but the universe is old and the walls are thin. We cannot go back to the way things were. We cannot go back to hiding. Earth is open. Our technology, our understanding of dimensional physics, we share it with you. But in return, we ask for one thing." The chamber leaned in. What would the humans ask for? Territory, weapons, leadership. "We ask that you grow up," Vance said softly. "The wars of expansion, the petty squabbles over dirt, they have to end. There are things in the dark that are watching us. If we are divided, we are food. If we are united, we are a fortress. We ask that the Concordat become what it claimed to be, a guardian of life." The proposal was met with silence, then a slow, rhythmic clapping from the Silan delegation. Then the Valdrak began to stomp their feet. Soon, the entire chamber was a thunder of applause. It was the beginning of the Terran era, not of conquest, but of stewardship. As the years passed, the galaxy changed. The Valdrak, once the terror of the Rim, became the protectors of the trade routes, their aggression channeled into defense. The Silan became the architects of the new galactic grid, working with human engineers to stabilize not just Sol, but other weak points in the galactic structure. And humanity? They remained the quiet ones. They did not dismantle their fleet, nor did they expand their borders. They stayed in Saul, the wardens of the Great Seal. But they were no longer alone. Lyra, now an elder of her people, often visited Earth. She would sit with Vance, now retired, on a balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. They would watch the sunset, the sky streaked with the contrails of alien transports descending to the space elevators. "Do you miss it?" she asked him one evening. "The silence?" Vance took a sip of tea, watching the first stars appear. "Sometimes," he admitted. "It was peaceful in a way, just us and the mission, but this." He gestured to the sky, alive with the traffic of 1,000 worlds. "This is better. We were surviving then, now we are living." She looked at him, studying the lines on his face. "They still fear you, the outer systems. They call Earth the sleeping giant. They say that if the humans ever truly got angry, the galaxy would crack." Vance chuckled. "Let them think that. Fear is a good deterrent, but you know the truth, Lyra." "Yes," she said, looking up at the band of the Milky Way. "I know. You aren't the giant that sleeps. You are the giant that holds the door shut so the children can sleep." The legacy of the Saul anomaly became a legend, then a myth, then a foundational truth of the new galactic civilization. The humans had proven that true power was not in how much you could destroy, but in how much you could endure. They had taken the hardest post in the universe and held it without complaint. And when the time came, they didn't conquer the galaxy. They invited the galaxy in, handed them a trowel, and said, "Help us build." Far out in the deep void, beyond the light of the furthest stars, the entropic entity drifted, hungry and formless. It probed the edges of the universe, looking for a weakness, a crack, a silence. But wherever it looked, it found only light. A golden, burning web of unity that spanned the spiral arms. It found no way in. The galaxy was no longer a collection of flickering candles waiting to be snuffed out. It was a single, blazing fire. And standing at the center, tending the hearth, was the species that had once been thought helpless. The species that had turned the dark into a wall. The humans, and they were watching back. The story of T. He saw event was taught in every academy. Young Valdrak cadets learned the discipline of the human shield. Silan scholars studied the philosophy of the barrier. But the deepest lesson was one of humility. The galaxy had looked at a silent blue dot and saw a victim. They had been wrong. They had been looking at the most dangerous thing in the universe, a pacifist with a loaded gun who had chosen not to fire it until the wolf was at the door. And so the galaxy spun on, safe in its golden cage, protected by the quiet ones. The Great Peace was not just a law, it was a physical reality engineered by human hands and maintained by galactic unity. The war against the dark would never truly end, for entropy is eternal. But for the first time in the history of the cosmos, the dark was losing, because Earth was awake, and it had brought friends. One evening on the station Aegis, a new director stood looking out at the healed scar in space. She was young, her eyes bright with the same intelligence that Vance had carried. Beside her stood a Valdrak commander and a Silan mystic. They watched the sensors, the readout steady and strong. "Status?" the director asked. "All sectors green," the Valdrak reported. "The lattice is singing," the Silan added. The director nodded. "Good, keep the watch, and send a message to the new species in the Theta cluster. Tell them we hear them. Tell them they are not alone." "Shall we send the fleet?" the Valdrak asked, old habits dying hard. The director smiled. "No, send the engineers, send the diplomats, and send them the history of Earth. Let them know that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means we're listening." The message went out, a burst of data carried on a beam of coherent light, traveling faster than the expanding universe. It was a message of welcome, of warning, and of hope. It was the voice of the galaxy speaking with a human accent. "We are here. We are standing guard. You are safe." And in the dark, the monsters trembled, for they knew that the guardians of Saul were no longer just holding the door. They were fortifying the house, and the house was full. The end.